Okay, Joshua chapter 22. We finished up there well, we didn't finish up, but we were working on Joshua 22 last week, and we had gotten to the point where three of the tribes already had their portion in the land east of the Jordan River. Which tribes were there? Tribe of half of Manasseh and Gad and the sandwich, Reuben. All right. Children of Reuben, the children of Gad, and half the tribe of Manasseh. They had already received their portion of the inheritance before they ever crossed over the Jordan River. But rather than remaining behind and allowing their brethren to continue over the Jordan River, continue westward, and to do all of the work themselves, they went over with them. They crossed over the Jordan River with them and went into the land of Canaan and assisted their tribesmen, their kinsmen, in driving out the inhabitants. Right? They it was like we're together in this. We're not going to hold back and well, we've got ours. You go find yours, and then you're on your own. They went over with them. It would remind you of a lot of the Articles of Confederacy of the United States before we had the Constitution. You know, it was just it was a confederacy, but it was not. They weren't bound together. And this is much in the same way. While they were a nation, they were individual tribes, and they had their individual lands. They were united under a form of government. Of course, that idea of God's law governing both their religious and their civic lives. So these tribes went over with them and proceeded to assist them in driving out the inhabitants of the land of Canaan. Now, we know that Joshua said, he said, we've done everything that we said we were told to do. We were faithful in all things. And not only that, but God has been faithful in all things. God said He would allow us to do this. He assisted us in doing this. Now, it's time for you three, Manasseh, Gad, Reuben, it's time for you guys to go back home, take your ease, plant your crops, grow raise your livestock, build your homes, do all of these things, establish yourself as a state, so to speak, okay, as we would understand it. All right. So He tells them to go back over. So what did they do? They did exactly that. They went back home. They crossed back over the Jordan River and they went. But then they did something, and we talked about this a little bit last week, but we're going to finish this up and then move on. What did they do on their side of the Jordan River? They built an altar. Now, they didn't say what it was for, but the people who were over on the other side of the Jordan River see them building this altar. Right? They don't know what it's for. But when you typically build an altar, what are you thinking? It's for worship. And they know that the only place that it was acceptable to offer up sacrifice was where? The tabernacle. Okay? The tabernacle of the Lord was the only place that was authorized for them to light fire and to offer up that sacrifice that was required of them so many times a year and in so many different ways. All right, so they see them doing this. Well, immediately, the people on the west side of the Jordan, the rest of the tribes, began to, wonder what's going on, right? They're a little concerned. Here they are building this altar. Well, we know that the only place to offer up is on our side of the Jordan River, and there may have been a little bit of that thinking, our side of the Jordan versus their side of the Jordan. Our side of the Jordan, it's supposed to be over here. Now, here's the thing. It's interesting that when they have that kind of a thought process, it goes to why they were building the altar in the first place. And He tells them why. In chapter 22 and verse 10, the second part of that verse, the children of Reuben, the children of Gad, and half the tribe of Manasseh built an altar there by the Jordan, a great impressive altar. So it's apparently big enough to be seen with the naked eye from a pretty far distance back, so it's a pretty large altar. Now the children of Israel heard someone say, "Behold, the children of Reuben, Gad, and Manasseh have built an altar on the frontier of the land of Canaan, in the region of the Jordan, on the children of Israel's side." When the children of Israel heard of it, the whole congregation of the children of Israel gathered together at Shiloh to go to war against them. So at this point, we know that the tribes are still what? faithful to God, right? They still desired to serve the Lord, in so much that they were willing to make war against the other three tribes because they believed that they had gone into, they were going to worship it unacceptably. They had found themselves to be enemies of God, so we're going to go to war against them. Not sure exactly what they were going to do, maybe force them to tear down the altar, to conquer them and make them do what they were supposed to do. I'm not real sure, but they said they were going to go to war against them. And there would be enmity between the tribes. And that's not what God wanted, right? He didn't want there to be this competition. He didn't want there to be an aggressive thing between the two groups. So in verse 13 it says, the children of Israel sent Phinehas, the son of Eleazar the priest, to the children of Reuben, Gad, and Manasseh into the land of Gilead. So you had the land of Gilead and you had the land of Canaan, right? So those are the two areas that we're talking about. And he goes them with 10 rulers, one ruler from each of the chief house of every tribe of Israel. And they came to them, verse 15, they came to the children of Reuben, Gad, and Manasseh, to the land of Gilead, and they spoke with them. Thus says the whole congregation of the Lord, what treachery is this that you have committed against the God of Israel? Well, if nothing else, kudos to them for not just blindly accepting it, not just allowing it to happen without being challenged. They challenged them in this. And they asked them, what treachery is this? Now, what does it mean to be treacherous? It can be deceitful. Yeah, there's an attempt, there's a hidden attempt being made to do something. Now, what would that attempt likely would have been for them? To worship God unacceptably. Maybe they believed that they were offering up an altar to one of the pagan idols. They had already gone into idolatry. But in any case, they realized that within the borders of the nation of Israel, there was not to be any sacrifice other than that which was commanded by God. Now, here's the thing. And this, we talk about a lesson today, and I think this is a very an appropriate lesson. When we as a congregation of the Lord's people find out or discover that another congregation of the Lord's body has gone into error, what is our responsibility to them? Now, I'm not talking about going into war, not going to war, but to do what? To challenge that. Absolutely to challenge that. I think that in many cases, and I'm not saying all cases, but I think in many cases, we take the idea of a congregation being autonomous and taking that to the nth degree. Well, that's their decision, and I find that happening where one falls and then another falls. The one that fell before says, well, they need to make their own mind up. They need to decide their own thing, and then there's nothing being made. There's no challenge being made to those congregations. And I very much respect a congregation that will write first, you notice what he says to them. They didn't write a letter to them and send it by courier, did they? What did they do? They went to them. That directly reflects how we're supposed to go, what we're supposed to do with the brethren who are in error. What do we do to them? We go to them. We go to them. First we go by ourselves to establish the matter. Then if they will not hear, now here's the thing, if they will not hear, we go to them with a witness. And we continue to do that. And the whole what's that? No. It could be the person sitting next to you. It doesn't have to be a man, it doesn't have to be a woman, it doesn't have to be anybody. You're supposed to take a witness. It doesn't even have to be, when it says witness, it doesn't even have to be somebody who saw supposedly what was done. It means a witness between the two of you, not a witness to what was done. It's a witness to the meeting. It's a witness to the people that are together. Say, for example, I have aught against my brother William, and I go to him and he will not hear me. So then I take another person, and they are a witness to the meeting. For one thing, they witnessed that I went to him, that there was a face-to-face meeting. And here's the thing: we got to be real careful that we think that, well, if I do anything else, it's just as acceptable. If I write a letter to him, it's just as acceptable. If I write him a note, it's just acceptable. If I make a Facebook post, it's just as acceptable. That's not what it says. It says you go to your brother. I mean, that word go is an imperative. It's a physical thing. I go to him. For one thing, we have to establish the matter. And I have to show him that I'm not so I'm not so informal that or so formal that a letter will work or a note will work. What's that? I still think it ought to be a physical going to. I think a physical meeting, face to face. The reason is this. I found that when people talk face to face and when they're sitting down with one another, especially when they've established that contact, I believe that we communicate better face to face. When I sit down with somebody, I see their face, I see their facial cues, I see where they've been wounded, I see where they're angry, I see where they're upset. If I'm on a computer, if I'm on a phone line, if I'm on something like this, I can't see them. I don't know where they're going. It's incredible how many times I've talked to somebody and they tell you something, they say the words to you, but you see by their facial cues that they've been pained. They're pained by something. You know, when you call somebody and you say, "How are you doing?" "Oh, I'm fine." Well, what do you have to go by that? The words. That's all I have. I hear the word. They're fine. Okay, well, they're fine. But how many times have you talked to somebody and they say, "I'm fine"? Well, you know something's not right. There's something that's not right. But when you go to somebody and you establish that physical contact, for one thing, we're less likely to get mad and hang up the phone. We get mad and hang up the phone. All right. I found that I've had to quit doing this when I write something out. You can't read tone, you can't read attitude, you can't read mood. But boy, when we establish the matter, and here's the thing: what does God say to do? Go to Him. There's a reason for that. There's a reason for it. Am I to say that you're in error for calling them on the phone? No, I'm not going to say that you've made some sort of grave error and that God's not accepting of that. But what does He tell us to do? Yeah, it tells us to go to Him. Yes. Yes. Mm-hmm. When you go to someone's home, and let me tell you, boy, it's difficult. It's difficult to talk to a brother or sister in error. Oftentimes also when there's been, we've had trespass against us, it's difficult to do. It's not the easiest thing in the world. And I've always not necessarily appreciated it, but certainly respected those folks who they just don't have a problem doing it. I mean, it's not I'm not a big person for conflict. I don't like conflict. I don't know too many people who do. I know some people who thrive on it. Boy, if there's not conflict going on, they just don't feel whole. But I've never been one for conflict, and it's very difficult to screw up your courage and go and can we talk? I need to talk to you. But here's what they did. This is what they did. These were their brethren. Okay, they were going to make war against them if they didn't get the answer that they were looking for, that they needed. They were waiting to hear what these people had to say. And so they go to them. They give them the opportunity. And this is another thing. They give them one of the things is we give people an opportunity to explain themselves. Okay, we don't immediately assume the worst. Okay, but here's what they are. They're going and talking to them. What's going on? All right, what treachery is this? Now the word treachery here. That's the English word treachery. The idea here is trespass, something that's been done, and it's been trespassed because they built something that they weren't authorized to build. At least they believed that it was. Here, let's look and see what's happening. They've sent sent these emissaries to talk to their brethren to find out what's going on with this altar that you've built. So he says, "What treachery is this that you have committed against the God of Israel to turn away this day from following the Lord, and that you have built for yourselves an altar, that you may rebel this day against the Lord?" This is going to come back on them so badly in the years to follow, because we see what happens when the children of Israel do fall away from God, and they do begin to build altars. Here, there's one altar, and they're upset about it. What's going on? How dare you build this altar in direct violation of God's commandment? And then the first thing they do in the divided kingdom is start building altars all over the place. Bethel and Dan, and then later to follow in many other places. And not only that, building altars to worship idols. Not just altars to worship Jehovah, but altars to worship idols. Is this the iniquity of Peor not enough for us, from which we are not cleansed until this day, although there was a plague in the congregation of the Lord? But you must turn away this day from following the Lord. And it shall be, if you rebel against the Lord, that tomorrow He will be angry with the whole congregation of Israel. Nevertheless, if the land of your possession is unclean, then cross over to the land of the possession of the Lord's, where the Lord's tabernacle stands, and take your possession among us. So they give them this option, right? That, if this isn't enough, if you feel that you have to have an altar because your land is unclean, that you need this altar to purify the land, then leave where you are. Come to us. Come over with us. We'll make room for you. There's more than enough room. You can have your possession on our side of the Jordan River if you feel that portion. And there was a real concern among many of those folks that Jordan River was the absolute dividing line. Anything over that was unclean. But that's not what God said. God gave them the land. God purified it for them, and there it was for them. But listen, if you're worried about this, if this distresses you, you feel that you need to be with us, then by all means. Only don't do what? Yeah, don't trespass against God in this thing. Don't make this altar. Do not worship unacceptably to God. And they were also concerned, he says, look, He may get angry with you, and it may spill over onto us. He may look at us as a whole. And He may be mad at us because we didn't do something about this. They were told to do something about this, right? Well, He gave them the law. If there's someone in the congregation that is engaged in this sin, you purge the sin, right? He told them to do that. Purge the leaven, right? So He said, if there's a man among you that is engaged in this type of sin, you're to kill him, and in doing so, you purge the evil out of Israel. Well, they're worried about purging this evil. Hey, we got to get rid of this. We don't want God to get mad at us because you've decided to do something unlawful. All right. So, and continuing on, let's see, in verse 21. Verse 21, then the children of Reuben and Gad and half the tribe of Manasseh answered and said to the heads of the divisions of Israel, the Lord God of gods, the Lord God of gods, He knows, and let Israel itself know, if it is in rebellion or if in treachery against the Lord, do not save us this day. So they're telling them what? If we're wrong, if we're in violation, if we're in rebellion against God, then go ahead and slay us. But that's not what's happening. They're kind of telling them, look, we're not in rebellion against God, because if we were, you'd be absolutely correct in destroying us. Yes, sir. At this point, let me find. At this point, right now, the tabernacle is in Shiloh. It could move around, but at this point, that was where they had Joshua had established that sort of a headquarters, and that's where they were. That's where it was stationary for a great period of time, a long period of time. Eventually, it was of course brought into Jerusalem because they wanted to establish Jerusalem as the capital. Okay, the capital of Israel. But God Himself didn't even say to establish Jerusalem as capital. That was something, that was where David's city was. That was where David made his rest. And it became de facto capital of Israel. And that's where the tabernacle was brought. Okay? But at this point, it's still in Shiloh. And it was a movable thing, but it was stationary at this point. And it stayed there for a period of time. Yeah, absolutely. I think we look at this and we think, wow, what a huge place. It's really not. Israel was not it's not a very large country. It's still not, even the borders of modern day Israel are not that big. It's really not, it's a very easy drive from the very, southernmost part. If you were to drive in this, it'd be a very quick drive to the very top of it. So yeah, God didn't want to make it difficult for his people to get to the tabernacle, did he? No, it was. Yeah, yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. All right. So here he says, look, if we've done something wrong, you're perfectly within your rights to kill us. Godspeed. However, if we have in verse 23, if we have built for ourselves an altar to turn from following the Lord, or if to offer on it burnt offerings or grain offerings, or if to offer peace offerings on it, let the Lord himself require an account. But turn 24, they give them this. But in fact, we have done it in fear, for a reason, saying, in time to come, your descendants may speak to our descendants, saying, what have you to do with the Lord God of Israel? For the Lord has made the Jordan a border between us. You children of Reuben and children of Gad, you have no part in the Lord. So what was their fear? In the time to come, people who had forgotten, they would be cut off. The Jordan River would be a line, a delineation between the 10 tribes over here and the tribes of Gad and Reuben over on the east side of the Jordan River. It was more of a fearful thing. They wanted to establish a memorial. So what does he say? Verse 28, therefore we said that it will be, when they say this to us or to our generations in time to come, that we may say, here is a replica of the altar of the Lord which our fathers made, though not for burnt offerings nor for sacrifices, but it is a witness between you and us. Far be it from us that we should rebel against the Lord and turn from following the Lord this day to build an altar for burnt offerings, for grain offerings, or for sacrifices, beside the altar of the Lord our God, which is before his tabernacle. So they tell them the reason that we built this was as a witness, so that you see that we are still your brethren. I'm not sure what kind of instilled this fear in them. I looked through and I couldn't find anywhere where it showed any kind of strife between the tribes. However, I did look at a couple of things in regards to the tribes of Israel, and they said that in reading that the tribes, once they were established, once they had their inheritance, they were never a cohesive nation until David became king. They were, but as I said, we would look at it in the same way of the idea of the Articles of Confederation in this country today. Every tribe and every region, every group had its own way of doing things and had its own loyalty to the tribe rather than to the nation as a whole. And David actually came in and finally forged it into what we would consider to be a cohesive nation. I mean, the tribes still had their inheritance and still had their lands, but I didn't see where there was any strife between them. But like anything else, do we have issues between the states? Disagreements, arguments, that kind of thing. Are the laws in, say, Tennessee the same as the laws in Georgia? Some are, some aren't. Okay. Sometimes there's a rivalry between states for particular things. Water's one of them, yeah. Resources, right? Resources always kind of tend to bring out some disagreements between the states, right? Look at Georgia and Florida. There's always this thing going on, but California and virtually every state north of California, the water situation, but everything. A free movement between the tribes. One tribe might have been, listen, we don't want anybody leaving. The other tribe might have been, hey, we want more people to go. In any case, I could not find anywhere where there was a serious conflict between the tribes, but there was a great deal of conflict between them in minor strifes. They were not a cohesive nation. You basically have 12 city-states that are all dwelling within the same borders. Yeah. No, these, like I said, this is not a large piece of land. But they managed to make a go of it, and they did pretty well, right, for a long period of time. God, and remember how they did that. God's help. When God withdrew His favor, it did not take long for them to fall, did it? I mean, it was a very short fall. God allowed them to struggle along for a little while, and then He finally allowed them to be carried away, and for Israel to be basically done away with until He brought them back. But yeah, good points all. So here it is. He says, this is what it is. This is not an altar to burn sacrifices. This is not an altar to put up to give our offerings. That's not what this is for. This is simply as a witness between us and our countrymen over on the other side of the Jordan River, so that in years to come we will always see this mound of stones and realize that we have a common God. We have a God that we share, and we all worship that same God, so that we have a portion in each other. Okay. Mm-hmm. No. Big enough. Big enough that it wasn't going to go away in several generations. Okay. So here, the first major conflict of what happened was resolved, wasn't it? Because the standard was followed. They went to him and asked him, "What's going on? Be very careful about what you tell us. Have you already turned away from following God?" No, absolutely not. This is between us. It's a replica of the altar that's in the tabernacle, but we have absolutely no intent on sacrificing God. Now here's the issue. Here's one issue. Could you say that the children of Gad and Reuben and Manasseh could be playing with fire if they're not careful? Because as they say, we built it as a witness between us and the tribes on the other side of the Jordan. But in generations to come, what could generations to come do with that altar if they're not instructed right? All of a sudden, that altar that was built as a witness becomes an altar that is used for an unintended purpose. So we have to be very careful about what we do and why we do it. Well, we're not doing that for this reason, but we have to be very careful, don't we? And the children of Israel had to be very careful. Constant instruction. That's why God made that. He gave them that imperative that they are to train your child in the way they should go. Now, I'm going to tell you. Now I've still got a sermon to come on that, but anyway, I'm going to show my hand. I don't want to do that. He says, I want you to train your children in the law. When are they to train them in the law? All the time. When you rise up, when you go to bed, when you're walking in the path, when you're on the road, everywhere. You always train your children, because in times to come, that altar that you had no intention of using for false worship could easily be used for that if your children are not instructed. Things happen, don't they? All right. Now, verse 30. Now when Phinehas, the priest, and the rulers of the congregation, the heads of the divisions of Israel who are with him, heard the words that the children of Reuben, Gad, and Manasseh spoke, it pleased them. Then Phinehas, the son of Eleazar, the priest, said to the children of Reuben, the children of Gad, and the children of Manasseh, "This day we perceive that the Lord is among us, because you have not committed this treachery against the Lord. Now you have delivered the children of Israel out of the hand of the Lord." So they returned from the children of Reuben, Gad, and Gilead. Okay, I read that wrong. I'm sorry. The children of Reuben and the children of Gad from the land of Gilead to the land of Canaan. So they crossed back over to the west side of the Jordan to the children of Israel and brought back word to them. So the thing pleased the children of Israel, and they blessed God. They spoke no more of going against them in battle to destroy the land. The children, and verse 34, the children of Reuben, the children of Gad called the altar witness, for it is a witness between us that the Lord is God. We share the same God. We are united in our worship of the God. All right, let's go real quick. Chapter 23. Chapter 23, the heading that in my translation says Joshua's farewell address. Joshua has been ruler. We'll just say ruler over Israel, head of the tribes for a number of years now. And starting in 23 and verse 1, and it came to pass a long time after the Lord had given rest to Israel. I like this because of what it tells me is this, that God allowed Joshua to go in. He allowed them, he sent him in with all of these children of Israel, all of the Israelites. They conquered the land. Not only that, but he gave Joshua time to enjoy, didn't he? Not only was he able to conquer the land, but he was able to enjoy that period of rest. Because it took a while to conquer the land. I mean, we look at it, it's a fairly small portion of land, but when you got a lot of people in it, and you're walking everywhere, it takes a while to defeat these enemies of God. So not only did he bring Joshua in with the Israelites, he gave him a piece of a territory to call his own, and he gave him some time to enjoy the fruits of their labor. It's kind of what we want, right? We think about how long Joshua had. That's the good thing about us. When we cross over our Jordan River, how long will we have to enjoy the land? Forever, an eternity, right? So he had given rest to Israel from all of their enemies round about. And he says that Joshua was old, advanced in age. Joshua called for all Israel, for their elders, their heads, their judges, their officers, and said to them, here's his farewell address, I am old, advanced in age. You have seen all that the Lord your God has done to these nations because of you. For the Lord your God is He who has fought for you. Even now, Joshua acknowledges that who really delivered the land to them was who? Okay? It wasn't them. They were merely physical instruments of God's wrath. Okay? All right? We're physical instruments too, right? We're jars of clay. But what do? We're not out to conquer a land, are we? At least not physically conquer it. What are we out to do? We take the Word of God. All right, we take Christ into the world. See, I have divided to you by lot these nations that remain to be an inheritance for your tribes from the Jordan, with all the nations that I have cut off, as far as the great sea westward. And the Lord your God will expel them from before you and drive them out of your sight. So you shall possess their land as the Lord your God promised you. Therefore, be very courageous to keep and do all that is written in the book of the law of Moses. I like how he phrases this. He doesn't simply say to do it. He says, be courageous. Does it take courage to obey the word of the Lord and to keep the laws of God? Absolutely it does. Because they're going to find out, just because they took the land, what did they have to do in order to keep it? They had to remain in God's good graces, right? And to remain in God's good graces, they had to keep the law. So the idea of keeping the law requires courage, because it is very easy to slide off into what we call apostasy. Very easy to do that if we're not careful. We have to be courageous in that we are going to be obedient to God even into the point of death. Right? And this is what he's telling them. Be courageous. Right? Keep the land. We've delivered the land. We've divided up the land. Be courageous so that you can keep the land, because you'll lose it otherwise. Lest you turn aside from it to the right hand or to the left, and lest you go among these nations, these who remain among you, you shall not make mention of the name of their gods, nor cause anyone to swear by them. You shall not serve them, nor bow down to them, but you shall hold fast to the Lord your God as you have done to this day. For the Lord has driven out from before you great and strong nations. But as for you, no one has been able to stand against you to this day. 1 man of you shall chase 1,000, for the Lord your God is He who fights for you as He promised you. Therefore take careful heed to yourselves that you love the Lord your God, or else if indeed you do go back and cling to the remnant of these nations, these that remain among you, and make marriages with them, and go into them and they to you, know for certain that the Lord your God will what? He will not drive out these nations, but they shall be snares and traps to you. Folks, this is just, I mean, it's absolutely applicable to us today. You can't look at this and say that it does not apply to us today. We cannot entangle ourselves in denominationalism and expect to escape without God. If we go into these people and we make marriages with them, they will be a snare and they will be a trap. How many people have left the Lord's body, have left the Lord because they got ensnared in something? They got caught up in some false doctrine. They began to make friends, and I'm not talking about simply acquaintances, but began to make really good friends with folks that were in denominations then, and they began to be pulled away. Okay? How many congregations of the Lord's body have done the same thing? We're going to have a pulpit swap. We're going to do this civic thing, and we're going to hitch ourselves together with local XYZ congregation of this denomination down the street. Now, we're not worshiping with them, but we're going to get involved in this together. All right? We're going to establish this foundation, and we're going to have people from denominations acting on the board of directors, and we're going to... It just does not work. It just doesn't work. As much as we want it to, we want to be friends with people, right? We want to get along with people. But what happens? We get pulled away. Yes, sir. Sure. Yeah. 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 I've seen it happen. I've seen half a dozen universities or colleges that were once sound groups that began to cast their net places they shouldn't have cast their net, and now they're beholden to interests that are not compatible with Scripture. They're not compatible with the Lord's Word. They've sold themselves. I hate to say that like that, but it's true. They sold themselves for a mess of pottage. We need more money. We need to have a greater, broader appeal. And what happens? The Word begins to weaken, and the message begins to be watered down, till really it's not much of a message anymore. That's it. All right, we're going to stop. We're not going to finish this. We're going to come back. We're going to finish Joshua's farewell address next week. And then I think we'll be just about done. Good comments. Thank you.